Welcome to this episode of Thou Shalt Not Suffer, the Witch Trial podcast. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack.
We're joined in this episode by acclaimed Salem Witch Trials historian and author Marilynne K. Roach. We'll be talking about two women and two men involved in the Salem Witch Trials, Bridget Bishop, Rebecca Nurse, John Hale, and Samuel Wardwell.
Marilynne compiled all the biographies and records of the Salem witch hunt.
She wrote 6 Women of Salem, and now she's working on 6 Men of Salem. You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
I'm pleased to introduce Marilynne K. Roach, author of The Salem Witch Trials, a day-by-day chronicle of a community under siege, 6 Women of Salem, the untold story of the accused and their accusers in the Salem Witch Trials, who is currently working on 6 Men of Salem.
You compiled the biographical notes for records of the Salem witch hunt. Did that prepare you for writing your biographies in 6 Women of Salem?
I would imagine that working on the biographies would have helped because I knew more about where you can look. Genealogy books were great if something existed for that particular person. And old town histories, as well as the standard histories of the witch trials, based to be contemporary sources. Not always. But for obscure, a lot of it can be luck. But just trying to look at everything you can get your hands on, or over the internet, or library archive, when you can, that seems to be the way to find things. I think serendipity is the word that refers to finding. But you just have to dig in.
What's the difference between writing history and writing biographies?
A narrow focus on biography. Well, history is the big concept also, but it's human history and individual humans are making it. One is really leads into the other. And I think of myself as a storyteller, wanting to tell a good story, which trials are, but also getting the facts correct, being accurate, trying to understand it in context, and then explaining it, presenting it in context. Because the events of 1692 didn't take place in a vacuum in their own time. And it certainly didn't take place in a 20th or now 21st century mindset either. So, yes, you have to think about a big picture, but if it's a particular individual, also focusing more narrowly on that first. But there's an amazing amount of connections you can find where if you find out who else is in the room when things happen, or who they're related to, or if they had a quarrel with a particular neighbor, which suddenly makes sense of a name that might show up in a testimony or some other paperwork. Wills are good, deeds, but just look at everything you can. My advice.
With biographies, once you've collected all the sources that are available, how do you fill in gaps? Do you just look at other people's lives?
The lives of the people that your subject interacts with. Yeah, you need that. But finding all the information, I only wish. There's always something that's missed, something you don't know about. Yeah, you can't get. As I write, I find, or reminded by my agent, that there is something that's not explained, that there's a hole in the story. You have to go looking in that direction and hope that you find something, and then backtrack and put the information in, and does it affect the other events that you've already found out about? Does it put them in a new light that just makes it a little more interesting or complete? There's really no end to it, but try to get as much as I can about people. Of course, as soon as a manuscript, let's say a publisher takes it and they're going to print it and they wrenched it out of my hands, then something always turns up, but not necessarily anything huge.
Why is it important to think of the historical figures as individual people rather than statistics, stereotypes, or symbols.
Salem witch trials, particularly, and history in general, tend to be stock characters or two-dimensional stereotypes, as we said, and not the real people at all. This is an example of someone who lived 200-300 years ago, and they didn't have a lot of advantages. Some people, it seems, nowadays can't really get over the fact that people had to differently because of the technology, to the point where people say things almost, they were very smart then, they had to watch TV by candlelight because there was no electricity. And also, information turns up as various people look into an era or a person or a topic, so that more information does become available. And the more real a particular person will seem, and they were individuals, assuming I'm remembered 300 years from now. I hope the book's still in print, but not necessarily. I am a person, and I would like my individuality. Not that I broadcast that, I'm always talking about some other character. Too many historical characters, generally, and witch trials specifically, which have a lot of urban legend attached to it. The characters seem to be not real people. They're symbols of something else, symbols of something we don't approve of, or just of the past, which is a really foreign country to most people. None of us have been there personally, but I don't think there's a great knowledge of what other eras were like, and they're all slightly different. They are individuals, and they were actual people then. If we can find out what they were like, we'd have a better understanding of what they went through and what their resources were and what they had to face.
With the past being a foreign country, as you described, how do you get inside historical figures' heads?
Try to get inside my subjects by trying to find out about not just their lives, but the culture and what their particular place within it was. In my other book, Six Women of Salem, I prefaced the chapters with identifiable fictional episode in italics, so I'm not lying about anything. This is make-believe, but I believe it's based on as much as I could find. So I'm trying to get in their heads, but there's no guarantee. I don't want people to assume I'm either lying about it or believe the whole thing. With the book I'm currently working on about six men of Salem, a lot of that was done during COVID when I was quarantined with all six men. It seemed that they're like ghosts and their opinions. And I had to get down to work and go out and do things. So it made me get down to work, but it also focused me on thinking about them, as I tried to do with six women in the first book. But yes, I'm still haunted by them. And I only hope I get what they might have been thinking generally accurate to their personalities. Otherwise, I could be haunted even.
When you consider what the other people in their era were saying about them, and then what we can say about them now, they're not going to haunt that. They're going to celebrate that.
I hope so. You can read somebody's testimony about their terrible neighbor, and we read it, and she seems perfectly innocent. So I'm assuming the transcription of whatever they said was accurate, but the viewpoint totally different.
How can we look at what an individual's perspective is versus what their experience is? For example, on the way to the gallows, they were experiencing something going there, but their perspective of what's happening to them. Are those two important dynamics?
They're facing death. They know it's unfair. Sometimes family was in the crowd waiting to see them off, who were sympathetic, and they got to say a heartfelt goodbye. that was allowed. They were allowed to speak at the gallows to give last words, and that's often described as very affecting, and it moved some people. But there's other people there who still believe that they're guilty as charged, that the person about to be hanged is guilty as charged, and they're not being sympathetic about it. I don't know which side had the more elation in the crowd. Probably the people didn't like them. So I try to imagine what that was like. And besides the fact that it's going to hurt, it's considered a shameful death, the hanged. Embarrassing, certainly. It hurts. It's death, crying out loud. But they're also going to have to face God and answer for their lives, which is why people wouldn't lie and say they were guilty. They weren't going to have that stain on his soul if they could possibly help. Yeah. And they stood fast and spoke the truth to the crowd. And only something. But more and more as the drama went on, I guess I tried to put myself in their place and what would I experience, but that's really guesswork because my life has been different than theirs.
We'd like to talk about John Hale now. And how was he involved with the trials?
Reverend John Hale was the minister in Beverly, which is across the estuary from Salem. His house still stands, by the way. Some of his parishioners were accused by neighbors, and he was, I guess you get a summons to come to court as a witness. He did relate what the various feelings of neighbors had been about those individuals. He doesn't come out and say they're witches or that he thinks they're guilty, but he's relating these suspicious events to help them more suspicious and their general character in the neighborhood. But he believed that the afflictions on the supposed bewitched was real, longer than others did. There's a mention in Thomas Brattle's letter explaining why things were going wrong, why he thought the court is proceeding wrong. And he said, by this time, it's fall. Only Harris, Noyes, and Hale still believe that this is witchcraft. And Samuel Parris's daughter and niece had been the first to be afflicted, so he's worried about sick kids in the family. Reverend Noyes is one of the ministers in Salem, which is where all the turmoil trials are going on. And then Hale across the river Beverly. You could get there in a few hours on horseback. I find him sympathetic, Hale, because although he believed that's what's going on for longer than he should have, he does come to his senses. He seems like an otherwise nice person. And after the trials are over, his congregation still thinks highly of him. They're not cutting off his pay as with Samuel Parris. There were ongoing problems with his congregation. But Hale didn't have those problems. And he wrote a book afterwards. That helps. We have his words. He wrote about witchcraft. Turned out to be mistaken, that they relied too much on ancient, as in pre-Christian even, opinions about what a witch was and how you identified them. And later in the Christian era, assumptions that turn out not to be true. They're not really in scripture, and they really don't add up in retrospect because some people have been hanged at this point and others have died by other things like disease. But I found him a sympathetic character, and he's on both sides. He's not actually an accuser, he believes them. He's on the side of the court, and then in the end, he realizes he was so tragically wrong. The accusations get too close to home with family. He seems to have doubt, and every time, throughout the course of the months that were consumed by this, people were confessing out of fear and a desire to live a little longer. But then someone would confess and say, no, I really did that. And he believes them too. Hale was caught between different information and too long trusted the wrong facts and opinion. But I think he came around when it was too late, as you could see, to help the people who had died.
I really like that you point out how his congregation was still supporting him at the end, because you definitely see how it was part of their church culture to often be in conflict with their minister.
There was a lot of conflict, and sometimes stereotypes again. The ministers were authoritarian and people had to do what they said. They weren't even getting paid much at the time. Not that they wanted to be rich from being a minister in a small rural town, but you did have to support your family. And there were conflicts. People had opinions. They spoke up and they criticized. There was a lot of that in Salem Village. Panic began, but not so much in Beverly, where Hale was minister.
And can you tell us a little bit about his family?
He was married to his second wife at the time of the trials, the first one having died. And when his first wife was alive, the maidservant, hired girl, was stealing from them. They didn't realize. Pretty clever about it. And one of the neighbors was in on it, and her family. They began to notice things missing. But the maidservant, at least, threatened Hale's daughter that she could raise the devil, and that the neighbor was a witch who would come and hurt her if she told her parents what would happen. And so after the thefts were discovered, the maidservant, they never knew where she went. She just left. But the daughter didn't tell her father how afraid she had been until after all this was over. And he finds it out when his daughter's dead. That was sad. But she dies. There's a son from the first marriage who's still alive. And he remarries some years later, and there's children from that marriage. And the second wife is going to have another baby when somebody in the neighborhood accuses her of sending her specter to afflict them. This is at the very end of the panic thing. It's also getting into winter, and I think people's heads were cooling after the summer of everybody suspecting everybody else. But kind of giving away the plot, but I mean, it's right in the history. He realizes his doubts before what he should have been paying attention to. He wrote a modest inquiry about in 1697, which was after the public fast that Massachusetts ordered, which the church, so everybody goes to their respective meeting house and the religious service, where people apologize to God and the community for whatever's been going wrong. It has made life more difficult. The witch trial fiasco was one of the problems. It's not quite mentioned in the order for the fast, but everybody knows that's what it's about, along with other things like, generally bad behavior, fractious youth, and therefore there's international problems because life is out of joint. Everybody knows this is about the witch trial. That was the occasion when the former High Court Judge Samuel Sewell, who was on the Court of Lawyer and Terminating, made a personal apology in his compilation, which people noticed because I guess the only one who stood up. But after that, Hale is thinking about what actually happened, and he begins to write. I may have gotten this from Sewell's diary because he traveled to Salem now and then on court business because he had relatives there. And he was talking with Hale, who mentions maybe writing a book. So it's 1697 when he died. But it didn't get published until after he died. So like 1701 that it came out. And it was not a huge seller, as I said. People just stick at the whole subject. But let's get beyond that and deal with the current topics. And a lot of people have already forgotten it. Didn't want to be reminded that they had been that wrong about so many things. But Massachusetts did finally make reparations to the survivors. Not everyone who was found guilty was hanged because the panic ended that effort. And also there were reparations to the family of people who didn't survive. And beginning in the early 18th century, some of the people who had been found guilty but managed to survive petitioned to have their names cleared. So just in case everything went wrong again, the death sentence would be reinstated. And that started then. But in 1711, the attainder, that is the guilty verdict, was reversed for the people who had petitioned for it. But not everybody got into the petitions, so actual exonerations continued, and the last person was cleared by name last July in 2022. So it took a while, but at least on paper, they're clear, which was interesting to hear about and be a small part of writing letters to your legislature. But this is part of the actual paperwork of the trials. And I get the result in an email, not pen and ink with a quill. But that process had gone on through all those changes in history. And the history was completed in my own time.
Thanks for sharing your experience.
It was a little thrilled when that finally happened. A lot of people who had worked on that and really worked on it.
I'm so glad you got to be a part of that.
Middle school teacher in North Andover in her class with the driving forces behind it in the civic class to get justice for Elizabeth Johnson. And there was a hearing some while ago with the Judicial Committee in Massachusetts considered the question. And along with a whole list of other judicial questions about people who needed exoneration now while they were still alive or other legal matters. And I was able to get a slot to speak a few words, strict time limit on it, in favor of Elizabeth Johnson. And I did it by Zoom. It helped to clear. And then it went through other hoops and other committees, other people working on.
Can you give us an idea of what you said for her during your testimony?
She survived, and she petitions to have her name cleared. And she's left out of the names in the reversal of attainder and writes to the General Court of Massachusetts asking them to insert her name. And she never hears back from them again. So I told them that General Court, through the committee, that she had made this petition, and 300 years later, we hope that Jill to finally do it. I quoted her word because they're saying she was innocent, but a lot of people worked on that. And there's a documentary being made about Boston with the historians and the school kid teacher. It took years. It took less time for the state to declare the official dinosaur and the official cookie. But this is more important. Chocolate chip.
Right now, there's a bill proposed for the exoneration of the accused witches from Connecticut colony. I descend from one of the accused, but she was not executed. Her name was Mary Bingham, and she was accused in 1697. So she was at the very tail end of Connecticut's trials. And she was the daughter of Mary Hale, who was accused in Boston. I feel very excited to be able to speak as a descendant. You were able to quote Elizabeth Johnson. We don't have a lot of that from Connecticut because their records just are not with us. But we still have all of these other women like Elizabeth Johnson Jr. They're an example that these women in this era that experienced this, they said they were innocent and they asked to have their names cleared. But for the Connecticut victims, we have to say this for them, because if they got a chance, we don't know what their words were, but I believe that they begged as well to be recognized as innocent.
in the eyes of the world as well as in the eyes of God.
We're excited for that, and it could all happen really fast. So we're on the brink of it. We're on the brink of it.
I look forward to it. News at 11. Film at 11. Oh, that'll be exciting.
Thanks for all that great information on John Hale.
And now it's time for your favorite segment. That's right, Minute with Mary. And here's Mary Louise Bingham to tell us more about Reverend John Hale and some of the lives that he touched.
Reverend John Hale, the longtime minister at Beverly, Massachusetts, offered testimony at several trials for witchcraft in 1692 at Salem. Two testimonies of which are often spoken are those testimonies against Sarah Bishop and Dorcas Hoare, both who either lived near Beverly or in the town itself. However, he was also summoned to testify at my ancestor's trial on the 2nd of July, 1692. That was the trial of Sarah Wilds. Reverend Hale told the court about 1677, his member, Mary Herrick, brought her aging mother, Mary Reddington, to him for spiritual counsel at his home. Mary Reddington lived at Topsfield, next door to Sarah and John Wilds. Mary did not like Sarah for reasons of which we can only speculate today. Could it be that Sarah had a supposed unsavory past and was now the stepmother to Mary's nieces and nephews? After all, Mary's sister Priscilla was the first wife to John Wilds. Could it also be that John married Sarah only 7 months after Priscilla died? We cannot be sure. However, according to Reverend Hale, Mary Reddington spoke of so many stories as to how Sarah afflicted or bewitched her that he could not recount all of them. Mary, however, does tell Reverend Hale her beloved nephew, John Wilds Jr., did feel sorry for her. This signified to Mary that her nephew believed his stepmother was a witch. Reverend Hale continued by saying that on a separate occasion, in 1672, he was invited to travel to Ipswich to pray and advise for Jonathan Wilds, Sarah's other stepson. Jonathan was possibly living with his uncle on East Street and seemed to be exhibiting strange behavior. Some neighbors thought he was strange, others thought he was possessed, while others thought he was just a faker. After Mary Reddington's visit to him in 1677, Reverend Hale now believed that Jonathan was bewitched. Imagine if such hearsay was not acceptable as part of the court proceedings during Sarah's trial.
Thank you, Mary, for those fascinating insights.
Should we talk about Samuel Wardwell?
Samuel Wardwell was a farmer and a carpenter, but in his spare time, he was also a fortune teller. Was the problem. I think he could probably read people very well, but he would tell fortunes, and he was much addicted to it than the neighbor who had this. He'd take a look at their hand, and he'd ponder and think about it, and then come out with some kind of. And enough of it came true that he had a reputation. But the orthodox line was, humans cannot do that. God's not going to tell you the future. So where is your information coming from? It's not the devil. And it's not deliberately palling around with satanic forces, certainly being stuffed into it by some fast-talking devil who you didn't realize was doing that until it's too late. They were in their collection. So he's known as a fortune teller. You're really not supposed to do that. It was like the end of August that he's finally named. He lives in Andover, which is north of Salem. And more people were accused in Andover than Salem. In July, the infection of paranoia or bewitchment spreads to other communities, notably Andover. So he's named, and he is arrested on the 1st of September. Not all of the paperwork is there, but he and his wife and their 2 eldest daughters are all arrested, and they all confessed. But there's a lot of confession by then, especially in Orlando. But he retracts his confession. They were led to believe, or they were just scared to say it. But at least bought them time, because if you confess, you were held as a co-conspirator to testify against the rest of the gang. Some of them acted as if they thought that they wouldn't be killed if they turned state's evidence, but that would not have been the case. Eventually, as happened with some of the confession, eventually they were tried and found guilty because the confession was believed when the retraction was not. Some of the women in Andover who were questioned on a particular occasion, they submitted a statement later when things were turning around and said that they didn't know what they said when they were being questioned at the hearing. They were just so frightened that they just agreed with whatever the magistrates were asking them, and they tended to lean towards really leading questions. Okay, so they just agreed with what they were being accused of to make questions stop. Or they didn't remember what they'd said at all. One of the women said that remembered the name of the monarchs at the beginning of whatever the clerk said. And after that, they really could not remember what they said. But apparently they had confessed, and now they're going through tortures of conscience because they've lied before God and the community and said that they were in Satan's grasp. And some of them would wonder, had I really done this and not remembered it? Had I really sold out to the became robbed, so to remembering that they had not. But Samuel Wardwell did deny his confession. Some people were in jail for months, and then they were tried. And the longer you were in jail, if you could stand the lack of sanitation, the better chance you had surviving panic to be over. But he's arrested at the beginning of September. He's tried later, denies his confession, took it back. He said, I did say those things in the written confession, but but now the magistrates don't believe that. They believe what he said earlier. And he's tried, and he's executed on the 22nd of September. So it took 22 days for the whole process. And whereas his wife and the 2 girls held to their confession, the wife did too. But they're not tried until the following year, January. Trials started up again, but we're not supposed to inspect all of it. They eventually survive all. And his wife, Sarah, is one of the first to petition to have her name cleared. So she survives. For Samuel. I feel sorry for him, and I like the idea of fortune telling, even though it was a risky thing to try and do. But things just don't work out for him. He keeps trying.
He confided that he was afraid he would be named. Was he already worried if perhaps he had made some compact with the devil?
I'm not sure if he worried that he had himself compact with the devil, but people certainly knew he was a fortune teller. He seemed to hide it. And that prospect more and more dangerous. So he probably heard that people were bandying his name around as he told his brother-in-law. But after he revealed those suspicions or fears of what people might say about him, I don't know if it made it worse or if it was just going to get bad anyway because he was unfortunate. He did not get a premonition that he should get out of town now. But it takes money to successfully get away very well. Some people did escape, but they tended to have more money. Abigail Hobbs confessed fairly early on. Abigail Hobbs had been a rather strange girl before all this panic started. But she had confessed because I was out talking to the devil last night. It's sort of a joke. But they took it seriously after it started getting really dicey. So she was a witness against the other supposed witches she'd seen so-and-so's spirit at such and such a witch meeting. So she was quite willing to testify against other people. But even that, eventually she was tried and found guilty. It's just that hangings were put on hold in October, so until they could get advice from England as how to proceed with this. And so she survives by default, even though she best accused others and was found guilty. But her name's, she doesn't seem to have deserved it. On the other hand, she really wasn't a witch. Just an convenient person to have around.
Let's talk about Bridget. Why was she the first to be tried and executed?
Because she was a likely suspect, having been suspected before. She's a feisty character, but not a witch. I like her feistiness, as people tend to do now. They didn't appreciate it so much then. She had been accused of witchcraft, and the case went to the upper court. There's not enough of the paperwork left. There are only some depositions, as far as I know, by Juan, spelled W-O-N. And he says that he saw her spirit in the chicken house. She was stealing eggs and a black cat bothering people at night while they were trying to sleep, but there really was no cat, so it was sent by Bridget Bishop. There's not a lot of specific details about the earlier case, but she had been suspected, and the case referred to the upper court, which would have tried all capital cases. But then she's alive, so apparently the case was either dismissed or she was found not. But neighbors remember that sort of thing. And she had had various disagreements with neighbors over boundary lines, chicken getting got, pigs going amok, and various neighborhood things. So she was probably a more likely suspect first, which she was hanged by herself, having been found guilty in that case. Later executions, there was a group of people who had been hanged over the course of weeks. But after that first hanging in June, just Bridget had died, one of the judges on the Oyer and Terminator court quit, Daniel Saltonstall. He didn't like the overuse of spectral evidence with the supposed victims of witchcraft, and seeing the forms, the apparitions, like a ghost, only from a living person, coming at them. Only the victim can think it, not the other people, they say. So he didn't think that was ironclad evidence, causing the court and Governor Phipps to consult with experts on spiritual matters, the Boston area minister. And their answer was, you can't trust spectral evidence. It could be the devil's delusion, which after the trials were all over, they realized we were deluded. The devil deluded us. But they ended this letter of advice by saying, we trust your best good judgment to use proper scriptural readings. And witchcraft is illegal in England, too. And for all of the precautions, the whole several paragraphs of precaution were pretty much ignored. And they continued with the other case for that summer. Nobody who was tried in the summer of 1692 was found innocent. They were all found guilty. When the court convened in January 1693, now the Superior Court, because Massachusetts had just received a new charter to make its government legal. They did not have as much self-government as before, because the governor had to be appointed by the king, for one thing, but they had to reconsider all their laws and make sure they didn't intentionally English come, witchcraft being illegal in England too, because of the way the trials had been going so wrong. The legislature established a permanent court for the capital case, an upper court. It's now a regular superior court. And also would not allow spectral evidence to be used against him. Those two things together, the people who were tried the following winter and the next spring, only 3 were found guilty. And those 3 were reprieved and eventually exonerated. They survived. During the summer of 1692, just the feeling was so out of hand that nobody had a chance unless they could stay in jail for a good long time. Some of the women who were going to have babies but were condemned as witches got to wait until after they gave birth, and by then the panic was over and they got to survive their own life.
There's so many layers to what was happening.
Stories within stories. It's not a simple story. Good guys, bad guys, no.
Is there anything that we need to set the record straight on around Bridget Bishop?
Well, her court papers were at an early date filed with another good white bishop court papers, so that they were assumed to be one person. There's Bridget Bishop, who lives in the middle of down Salem, and there's Sarah Bishop, who lived in the Danvers, Beverly Y, north of that in Bond Country. They're both married to men named Edward Bishop, which also makes it difficult. So Sarah and Edward Bishop ran an unlicensed rowdy tavern. That story gets attached to Bridget, whose victor is identified by a few people as wearing a red petticoat or red bodice, which wasn't that unusual a color if you could afford a good quality of dye. It's not considered too fancy necessarily, but the red petticoat, but tavern get put together, and she's running some dive somewhere in a lot of fiction. But yeah, they are interesting character. Her second marriage was to an abusive husband, and she hit him back. And they both had to stand on stocks, actually, stand on in public as an apology for that sort of brawling, which happened on Sunday. A genealogist said her first husband was somebody Wastleby. And if he didn't die just before or on the voyage, shortly after they landed, because she gives birth in Boston to a child who died. And there had been a child back in England who had died also. She's at least a widow here in New England for a year before she marries Thomas Oliver. She supported herself somehow and moved to Salem. It's her life there, which was apparently rocky. They do have a child who's an adult married woman in 1692. By then, Bridget's Oliver's died. Bridget's married to one of the many Edward Bishops around. Not necessarily related to the other Edward Bishops, but maybe someday someone will figure that out. So he's had an interesting life and hard.
She had child loss along with spouse loss. Would have that been looked at as just an experience many of the women were having, or would have that added to this list of negative things about her in people's eyes?
Sometimes the families where there had been a number of dead children blame the neighbors witching them too. Some other hard times she had to deal with, which maybe made her look cranky sometimes. I can identify, that's not my experience, but I can identify with her crankiness. But not the same me. The crankiness seems to be standing up for her right. Arguing with the neighbor whose chicken, well, Bridget's chickens got into the neighbor's yard and scratched it out. And she had words with the neighbor. But yes, she stood up for herself. Who owned the cake that was in contention? Was it hers, or should her husband have gone and sold it without asking.
You mentioned some trouble with her marriage to Thomas Oliver. What do we know about her relationships with him and with Edward?
They do have the child together. And that child survives, grows up. But he hit her and she hit him back. They both complained to neighbors at different times about being bruised by the other person. So she fought back. When they apparently did something in public, yelling at each other in public on a Sabbath, and they were both on the stand out in public with crime on their hat or something. The stand out in public to the gaze of the populace or be fined. Thomas's grown daughter paid the fine with him and left stepmother to stand on the pillory to the public gaze. So I guess she wasn't on the best of terms with her stepchildren. So it was odd. But Edward sounds not abusive. But on the other hand, he never shows up to speak on her behalf. Nobody speaks on her behalf. Bad. Which an interesting character. You'd hardly know he was still around, except she's identified as Edward Bishop's wife. And he shows up when Oliver's estate is settled after Bridget's death. He's living in the house he built on the Oliver land that Bridget was given permission to use for the rest of her life, even though she was widowed. It didn't immediately pass Oliver's heirs, interestingly enough. So he's in on the deed, and he's with probate and the daughter inheritance, like that. He certainly did not come to the fore and demand that his wife be perceived as an innocent person. John Proctor did that. He got arrested too, so did that.
Nobody was speaking up for her, but men were talking about dreaming about her. They were speaking about her. Why were they dreaming about her? Why were they complaining about that?
Pretty obviously dreams that certain men in the neighborhood had had. Either they found her threatening or alluring, and therefore a threat. Not my proud. I had thoughts about her. Certainly it's all her doing in their minds, perhaps. She's identified by her clothing. They're obviously afraid of one reason or another. And the description of not being able to breathe because she's pressing down on them in the night, supposedly, does match sleep disorder. I think it's traditionally called the hag, where somebody dreams as a witch or them trying to stop their breath, or sounds like those old legends of cats that eat on somebody's chest, sucking breath out. They phrase their dreams in that manner, I think. Maybe she's so defiant, she's got a fan base now. That there's where you want to be fly on the wall right now.
And you mentioned that she had a daughter who survived. What happened with her?
She's grown up and married, a Christian, their first name. She's married to a fisherman. And they have a daughter. And the daughter's daughter was a school teacher. Early 19th century Salem taught all little kids to learn to read. She does have descendants. So they were just, I don't know how they got along with the neighbors, but after a few generations, they trusted send their kids there to learn to read. And like then there'd been, the apology, reversal of attainder and so forth. Or that generation just thought, we have come so far in this modern time. That would be like during the China trade era. But yeah, there was quite a few children in like the fourth generation. Rebecca Nurse is quite a different character, and it didn't help her that she had a good reputation generally, and people spoke up for her. She had an extended family around her, lots of kids. They're married, they have kids. And the neighbors and the children testified for her, at least on paper, they called it to court. They get petitions signed. Lots of people sign a petition, which could be risky if by signing a petition, it might seem that you two were backing a witch if she's found guilty. But a lot of people stood up for her, and it still doesn't do anything in the world. Whereas Bridget had a quarrelsome reputation, probably justified. She had reason to quarrel, but she sang Rebecca's name. It was very dangerous.
How do we know that Rebecca was so pious? Her contrast was so different to Bishop's.
Rebecca was a full member of the church of Salem town. She lives in Salem village. For the village had its own parish. Her family supported her, and a lot of neighbors did think highly of her. I would say the level of support that she had indicated what people thought of her. And she was found not guilty, actually, the first part of her trial, which caused the afflicted witnesses, first those victims, to writhe in extreme pain and cry out that they were being hurt. If she's not actually indicted for that, it at least is a reason why the Chief Justice had the jury reconsider some evidence that hadn't been emphasized before, where she had actually made the remark when certain confessed witches had been led into the court to testify. But she commented, why bring them in? They're one of us, meaning us accused. But the jury reconsidered whether she meant one of us confessed witches. She hadn't confessed, but was she a witch? So the jury sent out. They come back and they ask, what exactly did you by that statement? And she doesn't say anything. She does. So they figure, all right, she's guilty. They pronounce her guilty, and that's that. Then somebody tells Rebecca what had just happened, and she realizes she hadn't heard the question from Julie. She's hard of hearing, considered elderly in her dying, exhausted by all this, and she lost her chance to speak up. Presumably would have helped, and might even have turned the tide of the trials if somebody had actually been found not guilty at this point. But and that's how the court proceeded. Maybe it wouldn't have made a difference, but
and she was nearly reprieved, wasn't she?
Yes. After the verdict comes down, then her family and supporters get petitions together and the petition and get it as far as the Governor Phipps, who does issue a reprieve, and we don't have paperwork. He did. And that caused such reaction or agony. Presumably they believed it themselves. Such a reaction from her supposed victim that some gentleman of Salem, not named, but maybe the magistrate, persuaded the governor to rescind it. And she's back on the feet. That was an up and down. Hope's dashed, hope revived, quite a roller coaster.
She has quite a number of descendants. Sarah's one. She and I are both descended from Mary Esty. And we know there's a very active town cousin association. And of course, there's the Rebecca Nurse homestead. So she has quite more of a legacy than many of the other persons that were accused.
And lots of descendants. I've met many of them. The fact that the farm. Most of it is there in the house. It helps make it more real if you can go to a place where things happen. And the Town Family Association website and all that. I did give a talk on 6 Women of Salem to one of the reunions. Okay.
Do you want to tell us anything about your new book you're working on?
And my fingers crossed, makes you want to work a little magic spell to attract publishers, but one mustn't do that. There's still a lot of work to do on it. Just proceeding chronologically, we've reached September. I need to fill in some blanks to explain things better, or explain something more. It must. And the 6 guys are all very real. Some realer than others. There's more information on some than on others. But they were chosen as the 6 women were chosen because there is some biographical information, just the trials, where there might be a few papers for somebody about being arrested and a jail bill or something, but what did they say? What were the neighbors saying about? And before all this blew up and the panic started getting out of hand, what were they doing the rest of their lives? Does it show up in town records, especially for the men who had a wider world move around it? Military stuff going on, the problems with French Canada, the French King, the English glorious revolution over there, what's going on in New York, what's going on in the wilds of Maine, right? Coast, not one hinterland. The English are in yet, but indigenous people who had French allying, the economic situation, it had to try and find out something about all that. But it all touches the story. And I hope I know enough to at least make it logical.
It's going to be great. It's going to be really important. Thanks for taking it on. Yeah.
It's fascinating. A whole bunch of rabbit holes, but they're all interesting. I hope they approve. Maybe sometimes a writer is more accurate than the subject would like, depending what you're saying. But there can be surprises too. Hawthorne, for example, was praised for his mercy at one point, not by the accused witches, but you'll see when it happens. Look.
Now here's Sarah with another important update.
This is End Witch Hunts News. I am so excited to announce an incredible East Coast speaking tour week that we get to assist with. Dr. Leo Igwe, the director of the Advocacy for Alleged Witches nonprofit organization, will be in the area. Myself and Josh Hutchinson are Salem Witch Trial descendants and co-founders of End Witch Hunts Movement, our parent organization. It is an incredible honor for us to organize a week of these speaking engagements during his May speaking tour in the United States, and to accompany him as he speaks in both the Salem, Massachusetts area and in the Hartford, Connecticut area, both places of historical significance to early American colony witch trial history. We would like to thank Friends of the Connecticut Witch Trial Exoneration Project, Rachel Christone, and the Salem Witch Museum for hosting a virtual presentation of Leo Igwe on Monday, May 15th. Please go to their Facebook event to RSVP. Witch persecutions and trials are ongoing incidents in Africa and other nations, reportedly at least 60. Witchcraft accusation is still a form of death sentence. Across the continent, thousands, mainly women and elderly persons or children, are accused, tried, attacked, killed, imprisoned, or banished every year. Join the Salem Witch Trial Museum on May 15th for a fascinating virtual lecture given by Dr. Leo Igwe. In his presentation, he will use several cases to illustrate the range of witch persecutions and why this early modern phenomenon persists in contemporary Africa. The Zoom link will be shared on their event page 24 hours prior to the event. This first event at the Salem Witch Museum is virtual, but Dr. Leo Igwe will be with us in Salem touring the historic sites, guided by a local seasoned in the history. End Witch Hunt's Board of Directors member and Thou Shalt Not Suffer podcast host of Minute with Mary, Mary Bingham. Tuesday, May 16th, is your chance to experience a very special evening of in-person conversation with Leo at the Rebecca Nurse Homestead in Danvers. Please see the Facebook event for details. Thank you to Dan Gagnon and the Homestead Director and board members for hosting us. Isn't this a great week? Make sure you mark your calendars. Next, you can enjoy an in-person speaking event with Dr. Igwe at Central Connecticut State University on Wednesday, May 17th. Thank you for hosting Dr. Kathy Hermes, Connecticut Explored magazine in the University Library. While in the Hartford area, Leo will be touring known witch trial historic sites with author and co-founder of the Connecticut Witch Memorial Facebook page and End Witch Hunt's Board of Directors member Beth Caruso. But wait, there is more. On Thursday afternoon, May 18th, Leo will be presenting at the Stanley Whitman House Living History Center in Farmington, Connecticut. This is hosted by friend of the podcast, Andy Verzosa. I want to break off to congratulate Andy and the Stanley Whitman House. They've been selected by the award committee of the Connecticut League of History Organizations to be awarded not one but two 2023 awards of merit. The first award is for the museum's book Memento Mori, Remember Death, and the second award is for their commissioned play, The Last Night. And last but not least, you can support the Stratford Historic Society by attending their inaugural Goody Bassett Ball on May 20th. This is not a speaking engagement for Leo, but Sarah, Josh, and Leo and other members of the Connecticut Witch Trial Exoneration Project will be in attendance, and we would love to talk to you about the history, the podcast, and how the speaking tour went. Thank you to all these witch hunt and witch trial advocates and leaders of witch trial history for your thoughtful collaborations and for giving Leo a platform to amplify his message. We want to see you there, listeners. Please come hear the talk and shake hands with us. This is a very important and special opportunity that is history in the making. This is my first time to the historic sites of my ancestors, Rebecca Nurse and Mary Esty. This is Leo's first in-person interactions with historic witch trial communities in New England. Come join us and make this a week that magnifies the importance of witch hunt education and action against it. Look for Facebook events for all these occasions posted by our social media. Would you like to know more about Leo or any of these event hosts? You are in luck because we have some great podcast episodes for you to listen to. For more on Leo, listen to episode Witchcraft Accusations in Nigeria with Dr. Leo Igwe. And to learn more about Beth Caruso and Dr. Kathy Hermes, listen to episode Between God and Satan. And to learn more about Dan Gagnon, listen to the episode Rebecca Nurse of Salem. And to learn more about Andy Verzosa and the Last Night play, listen to episode Introducing the Last Night, a Connecticut Witch Trials play. And keep your eyes open because another episode with Andy Verzosa will be publishing in the next few weeks. Get involved by visiting endwitchhunts.org. To support us, purchase books from our bookshop or merch from our Zazzle shop. Our links are in the show description. Come here, Leo. Invite your friends and family. See you there.
Thank you, Sarah, for that information. We'll be sure to head out and attend these events.
Meet you there.
Thank you for listening to Thou Shalt Not Suffer, the Witch Trial podcast.
Join us next week for our next round of Connecticut Witch Trials 101.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Visit thoushallnotsuffer.com.
Tell all your friends, family, acquaintances, neighbors, and pets about Thou Shalt Not Suffer, the Witch Trial podcast.
Keep supporting our efforts to end witch hunts. Visit endwitchhunts.org. Again.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.